The bells of Stockholm toll. The year is 1520. The city is silent, its people afraid. Blood runs on the cobblestones, seeping into the earth, staining the streets of Sweden's capital red. The Stockholm Bloodbath has begun, and 3 days of horror unfold. More than 80 men, noblemen and clergymen are executed. The Danish king, Christian II, calls it justice, but the people of Sweden call it murder. It is here, in the smoke and fire of death, that a legend begins to rise. A man would emerge from these ashes, one who would change the fate of a nation. His name was Gustav Vasa, and he would become the father of Sweden. The story of Gustav Eriksson Vasa begins not in glory, but in shadows. Born in 1496 into a powerful noble family, Gustav's childhood was marked by privilege and danger. Sweden was not yet a united kingdom, but a land torn between factions, squeezed under the iron grip of Denmark and the Kalmar Union. The Danes ruled with cruelty, and the Swedes dreamed of freedom. Gustav's family was deeply involved in this struggle. His father, Erik Johansson, opposed Danish dominance. This decision would cost him dearly. When the bloodbath erupted in Stockholm, Erik Johansson was executed. His son, Gustav, barely escaped the slaughter. From that moment on, Gustav's life had one purpose: vengeance. But how could a young nobleman, hunted and despised by the most powerful king in Scandinavia, rise against impossible odds? First, he had to survive. Gustav fled, running across frozen lakes and thick forests. The Danes hunted him relentlessly. He disguised himself, moved through villages, begged for shelter, and hid in barns. In the snowy depths of Dalarna, he found himself among peasants, humble men and women who lived under harsh winters and heavier taxes. He spoke to them, describing Danish cruelty, and warned them about King Christian's ruthless tyranny. At first, the peasants hesitated. They feared the king's power. But Gustav's fire was contagious. His words lit something in them. Slowly, the people of Sweden began to rally behind him. Legend tells us that when Gustav first came to Mora, the villagers turned him away. Desperate and betrayed, he began to ski away through the forests, but soon the villagers regretted their decision. They sent their fastest skiers to chase after him, begging him to return and lead them. This moment, captured in Sweden's greatest folktale, is still remembered today in the Vasaloppet, the world's oldest cross-country ski race. It marks the beginning of Gustav's uprising. From a hunted fugitive, he became a leader of men. The war for Sweden's freedom was brutal. The peasants, poorly armed but driven by fury, clashed with Danish troops. Gustav proved to be more than a nobleman. He was cunning, ruthless, and determined. He knew when to strike and when to retreat. He gathered allies, struck deals, and used the fire of rebellion to forge an army. The Danes mocked him at first, calling him a thief, a bandit, a traitor. But as his forces grew, their laughter turned to fear. One by one, Swedish castles fell. The countryside burned with rebellion. Gustav's war became unstoppable. In 1521, the tide began to shift. Gustav was proclaimed regent of Sweden by his followers, effectively placing him at the head of the rebellion. Christian II's forces, once mighty, began to crumble. In 1523, Gustav marched into Stockholm victorious. The Kalmar Union, which had bound Sweden under Danish rule for over a century, was shattered. The people hailed him as a hero, a liberator. On June 6, 1523, Gustav Vasa was crowned King of Sweden. This date, centuries later, would become Sweden's national day. But liberation was only the beginning. Gustav faced a kingdom in ruins. War had drained the land. The nobility was divided. The church, rich and powerful, answered more to Rome than to Stockholm. Gustav understood something vital. Freedom without unity is chaos. To secure Sweden's future, he had to reshape it from the ground up. He had to break the power of nobles, silence the church, and build a monarchy that could stand for generations. Gustav was not only a warrior, he was a builder and sometimes a tyrant. He turned to the Reformation sweeping across Europe. Martin Luther's ideas of breaking free from the Pope's control reached Gustav's ears. To Gustav, this was not only religion, but opportunity. By embracing Protestantism, he could seize the wealth of the Catholic Church in Sweden. Gold, silver and land once held by bishops would now flow into the crown's coffers. The monasteries were stripped, the church's influence broken, and Gustav's power grew. The people grumbled, but Gustav pushed forward. He knew that without central power, Sweden would collapse back into chaos. The king also understood the value of propaganda. He used priests to spread his messages, painting himself as God's chosen ruler, the savior of Sweden. Dissenters were crushed. Nobles who resisted him were executed or exiled. Gustav ruled with iron, but beneath that iron was vision. He was forging a nation that had never truly existed before, a Sweden that was independent, united, and strong. And his rule was not without rebellion. The Daca War in the 1540s saw peasants rise against him, furious over high taxes and harsh reforms. Niels Daca, a farmer, led thousands in revolt. For a time, the rebellion shook Gustav's power. Villages cheered Daca's name, and the king feared the country slipping away. But Gustav was relentless. He gathered his armies, crushed the rebellion, and executed Daca. The message was clear. Gustav's Sweden would not tolerate division. The crown was supreme. Yet Gustav was not only a warrior and a tyrant, he was also a father, both to his children and to his kingdom. He established a hereditary monarchy, ensuring that Sweden would not fall into endless disputes over succession. His sons would inherit his throne, binding Sweden's future to his bloodline. Though this decision would bring its own chaos in the centuries to come, it marked a turning point. The Swedish monarchy became one of the most stable institutions in Europe. Under Gustav, Sweden began to modernize. Trade grew, laws were standardized. Taxes, though heavy, built a state that could stand against foreign powers. He knew that Sweden, once weak and divided, could become strong if united. And though his methods were harsh, his results were undeniable. He had taken a bleeding, broken land and forged it into a kingdom. By the time of his death in 1560, Gustav Vasa was no longer just a king. He was a legend. To the Swedish people, he was the man who had freed them from Danish tyranny, the father of their nation, the builder of their state. His enemies called him a despot, a tyrant, a man who ruled by fear. Both are true. He was both liberator and dictator, savior and oppressor. History rarely gives us simple heroes. Gustav Vasa was not simple. He was complex, ruthless, and brilliant. But above all, he was necessary. His body was laid to rest in Uppsala Cathedral, beside the remains of his wives and children. His dynasty, the Vasa line, would rule Sweden for generations. His legacy would echo through the ages. When Swedes celebrate their National Day on June 6th, they are not just remembering independence, they are remembering Gustav Vasa, the man who turned rebellion into a crown, who carved a nation out of chaos, who made Sweden. Gustav's story is one of survival, vengeance, and power. From hunted fugitive to king, his life is proof of how one man's will can reshape the destiny of an entire people. He may not have been loved by all, but he was feared, respected, and remembered. And in history, that is sometimes greater than love. So when you hear the bells of Stockholm toll, remember the blood that once stained its stones, the fire that once burned in its forests, and the man who rose from that fire to claim a throne. Gustav Vasa, father of Sweden, conqueror of chaos, king of a new nation. But history has even more fascinating leaders waiting in the shadows. Stick around and subscribe. Let's explore their worlds together. History isn't just old stories, it's an epic adventure full of power, ambition, and incredible tales. Thank you for watching.